Hi friends! I recorded this video a few weeks back, and unfortunately, due to the holiday and having some technical difficulties, I didn't get a chance to finish editing this video until today. So, without further ado, here's the cooking video. Today, we're going to be cooking banana muffins, 2 loaves of white bread, and some sugar cookies for the first time. So on this day I decided to make some sugar cookies, and I'm not exactly the best baker, so I wasn't sure how these cookies were going to turn out. I will say they were fantastic and we enjoyed them. In our house we prefer to use the Kerrygold butter, and we usually always use the salted version. And here I am taking the entire stick of butter and I'm actually going to melt it in the microwave so that it is easier to mix into the mixture. And on this day, of course, I needed to refill my flour. I always keep my flour in the freezer for about 48 hours before I actually pull it out. So this flour had actually just come out of the freezer that morning, and I pour it into my storage container. Whatever doesn't fit in the storage container, I then put back in the freezer. Now I'm going to take some of the sugar and measure that out into the bowl so I can start actually mixing these cookies. In total, I used 3/4 of a cup of white sugar. Now I'm putting 2 cups of flour into the bowl with the white sugar. Here I'm measuring out some vanilla bean paste, and I've never actually used vanilla bean paste before, so this was new to me, and it actually turned out really good. I was happy with it. I put that vanilla bean paste in with the melted butter, and then I also cracked an egg in the melted butter because at this point it was room temperature. Moving back to the dry things, I now added a teaspoon of baking soda into the mixture. At this point, as I'm stirring everything together, I realized that it's a little bit clumpy, so I wanted to get out a sieve and kind of shake everything through it to get out the lumps and chunks. So I just grabbed another bowl and my little strainer and put all of the flour, baking soda, dry sugar, that kind of stuff into there. And then what you're going to see me do is kind of hit it against my hand to get everything into the bowl below, and that way I was able to break up some of those chunks and lumps that I had, mainly from the baking powder and the sugar. I'm not sure why I didn't think to do this sooner. I could have done it into the bigger bowl instead, but I chose to do it into a smaller one. My recommendation is always choose the bigger bowl for this. I know this might be controversial to some, but I actually don't like to try to break the clumps up that are in the sugar or the powder mixture. I prefer just to get rid of those. I don't know why, it's probably just me, but I usually just dump them and not into my mix. So now you see me putting the wet ingredients in with the dry, and I'm going to mix them up together to form the dough for the cookies. As you can see, I had to get in there some with my hands too to make sure everything was well incorporated, and I just like to feel the mixture as well. I like to be able to tell if I need a little more of something, and the way that I like to do that when I'm making cookies specifically for us, for family, not to give out to people, is I do like to get in there and actually touch the dough. I do the same thing with pasta dough too, and my husband laughs and says it's an Italian thing. Maybe it is, I don't know. But I do like to touch the dough and make sure that it's what I'm looking for consistency-wise. Now that I have my dough formed, I'm going to go ahead and get my parchment paper. Actually, on this day, I used a new cookie mat that I got, a cooking mat. And I really actually liked that. It made the cookies basically slide right off. I didn't have to fight them at all, so that was really nice. Now, I'm not fancy with how I make my cookies. I just kind of form them into balls and flatten them out a little bit and put them on the cookie sheet. You could get really creative and make like cutout cookies or something like that, but cookies are not something we eat a whole lot of in my family and in our house. And actually on this day, you'll see in a little bit, I only made 6 cookies and actually ended up freezing the rest of the dough. It's still in my freezer. And these cookies actually turned out to be huge. Justin and I actually ended up having to split a cookie to try them because they were so big. And they took us almost a week to get through 6 cookies. So they were definitely worth it though. They were a nice little sweet treat, but not too sweet. And Justin and I definitely enjoyed that because we're not really into sweets. So to freeze the cookies, all I did was I took the dough and I rolled it into kind of a log and then wrapped it really tight in plastic wrap, sealed up the plastic wrap, and then I put it in a freezer Ziploc bag and made sure all the air was out of it and stuck it in my freezer, and it's currently living on the door of our freezer. So I took the cookies and I stuck them in the oven for 350 for 20 minutes. Now I'm starting the bread, and the first thing that I do when I start my bread is get my yeast going so it can sit 5 to 10 minutes. I'm very particular about the water temperature. I found that really significantly helps my bread turn out well. So I always make sure that the water temperature is between 105 and 110 degrees before I put the yeast and honey in. And I also always use honey. I've never used sugar. The recipe I follow says you can use either. I just prefer honey. We like the taste of the honey in our bread. It's a very, very slight honey taste. So that's why I use honey. And I actually don't measure that out, but that is all the honey I put in the bread. The original recipe says to put in a couple tablespoons and then put the rest of the quarter cup into the actual mixture for the bread. But we just find that's too sweet a lot of times, so we don't do that. Now I'm going to measure out my oil, and for this recipe it's 2 tablespoons, and I measured out and I put it aside in a little cup, and that way it's ready for me when I need it, and I have it all ready to go. I don't have to mess with it anymore. This time I was smart with my dry ingredients and decided to run it through the sieve before. I actually mixed it, as I was measuring it, but I still hadn't learned my lesson from the cookies and still did it in a smaller bowl. So take it as you will. I still apparently have not entirely learned my lesson. So for now, I'm putting in about 3 cups of flour, and I will shake this through to get any lumps and bumps out. Here I'm measuring out 2 additional cups of flour, and that's because this recipe, you start out using 3 cups of flour and then you add a half a cup each time until you get the right consistency. But I have learned through making this bread in this house with the humidity and everything, I need a total of 5 cups of flour. So I sifted 5 cups of flour so that I was prepared. At this point, my cookies were done, so I went ahead and took them out of the oven, kind of gave them the touch test to see how they were. They felt done to me, they looked done, so I just left them on the cookie sheet to cool for a little bit. Here I'm just mixing up the dough for my bread, adding in the flour as I needed it, and I love to use my KitchenAid dough whisk for this. It makes the whole process easier, and it's super easy to just turn the KitchenAid on and let it go. And I forgot on this day to do my handy little trick of putting a towel over it so the flour didn't go everywhere. So of course, when I added in that flour, it went everywhere. And as you can see, I'm taking a 1/4 of a cup of flour each time and putting that in until I get the right consistency. And that's because while I know that 5 cups is what I need, I still want to make sure that I'm using the appropriate amount. So this is my bread coming out of the mixer bowl. I'm putting it in an oiled bowl, and I'm going to cover this and let it sit for an hour and a half in the kitchen. And these were the cookies off the cookie sheet. They were fantastic. So now that my bread has had its first rise, I have a couple of my loaf pans sitting there, and at some point I will oil them. I don't know if I already did by this point, but I always like to check the consistency of my dough. And when I punch it and it stays down, it's usually ready for me. So I go ahead and I take it out of the bowl, and I usually will just kind of figure out where half is, and I try to get it pretty even so that there's the same amount of dough in both baking pans. And I will use a dough cutter to cut it. There's the oil. I knew it was somewhere in here. Now I'm going to take both of those baking pans, loaf pans, put them on a cookie sheet, and put a towel over that for 45 minutes and let it do its second rise. Moving on, while the bread is doing its second rise, I had a whole bunch of bananas that were super ripe and I needed to make into some banana muffins. So I had whipped up some of that dough while I was working on the cookies. And here I am just scooping it out and putting it in the muffin pans. And I absolutely love these silicone muffin tins. They are the best. You put a little bit of oil in them, those muffins slide right out when they're done, and they cook to perfection. I do always like to go back and clean off any of my muffin tins that I may use if I spill a little bit of the muffin mix onto them. It just makes it easier in the end to clean it up. The banana muffins cook for about 15 minutes at 350. Here's my supervisor, and thanks for watching.